the live stream where your mind actually matters. My name is Syme, and hosting the show with me today is Tak, Adam, and Samad. Tak is back from his ankle injury. Every week we bring you the hottest topics every week we bring you the hottest topics as requested by our viewers and listeners. We'll be live monitoring the chat and comments on YouTube, Periscope, Twitch, and Instagram, so please send in your questions or simply tell us what matters are on your mind. In the last show, our audience expressed a lot of interest in discussing contemporary issues facing Muslim youth, particularly those living in the West. We've been asked everything from how to adequately address or tackle sexual assault and misogyny within our communities to can one be a practicing Muslim and gay. Our special guest today works with Muslim teens as a teacher, and we've asked her to share her perspectives and help us navigate through some of these challenging questions. Isaba, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Great.
We've been, since our last, I think episode 7, we discussed the horrific incidents of rape and sexual violence in Pakistan, and I didn't feel we did justice to that episode because we were missing a female perspective. So I really was looking forward to getting you on the show today for two reasons. One, so we can revisit that episode and maybe remedy some of and get your take on our analysis there and critique, but also talk about some of these challenges. In other words, how far off were we?
How deluded were we?
Yeah. Did we do a good job?
Yeah. Well, obviously, I've had a chance to listen to it because I regularly listen to Mind Over Matters.
Excellent. We have a fan.
Yeah.
Excellent.
There you go.
Right answer.
No. I got an important question. Have you liked, subscribed, and hit that bell icon? Because it's really important.
We gotta get those numbers up.
Numbers up.
I try and stay as anonymous as possible, but I will do that for you as soon as we finish this.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear.
I think we've won another fan today.
Yeah.
Yes, that's
Absolutely.
what I like to see. But yes,
I feel like you might have won me over maybe last week, but yeah.
Oh, nice. There we go.
Yeah. Can we repeat the question again?
Yeah, the critique that you would make of our analysis. So we kind of looked at the time, episode 7. We're talking about kind of 3 or 4 weeks ago, and the big news at the time was the spate of rapes that had just happened in Pakistan. Now we're seeing, and we kind of looked at that episode from a very narrow lens, from the lens of sexual violence that stems from South Asian countries and South Asian communities. Although it's not limited to those communities, and we appreciate that. But that episode was specifically looking at that, and I felt like there was a perspective we didn't get, and I wanted to give you the opportunity to critique our analysis. And if that was the case, what are the big ticket things that you would say, maybe you guys glossed over this, and maybe you got this right? So I guess, what's your take?
Yeah, so we'll do the shit sandwich. That's what we do as teachers. We give the good things first, and then the bad things, and then the good things all over again. So
is that the technical term?
That's what we amongst colleagues. Yes.
The layered approach. Yeah.
So look, I actually enjoyed the podcast. I really did enjoy the podcast, and I listened to the entire 1.5 hours of it, which is something that I don't often do. So, and I was quite engaged with the podcast, right? There were a lot of things that needed to be said, and I felt like that they were said. You did acknowledge the fact that there wasn't a female on the show. And so when I was listening to the show, it wasn't an expectation for me to feel like you needed to talk about a female experience because you had clearly said that. I think sometimes we missed, although it is really, really important to have a woman's perspective or some female perspective in this area, because it is something that really deeply impacts females. Sometimes it can be quite burdensome on them as well, because a lot of the time, because it is people who deal with these sorts of issues, who are victims of sexual violence or trauma, and they will need to relive that experience, and it can be quite burdensome. So it is something that I appreciate, that they might not be there all the time, but it is important to have a perspective there. And I think it was okay because you did mention that. I think that all of you did a good job in discussing some of the cultural issues that we might face. But at the same time, reading the title of the podcast really made me think twice, which was, do South Asian men have a propensity to commit sexual violence? And so for me, the first thing when I actually read it, when you had sent that to me, I was like, okay, this is going to be interesting, and I don't really know if this is something that I want to listen to, but I'm going to give it a go. Because I think we do live in a time where stereotypes exist, and we don't want to perpetuate a stereotype, right? And so that was something that I kept thinking about when we had this discussion, and I don't necessarily feel like that question was answered, and I don't know if it needed to be answered.
I sorry, go ahead, Adam.
No. I mean, it depends. Like, I don't know. It's like I just looking at the title now, it just kind of seemed like a clickbait title. Like,
that was what we were going for. To be honest, we were going for a clickbait title so that we could get so there's a lot of people in the YouTube world that that the only way we can kind of get our perspective out is to have a very clickbaity title. Yeah. And then they say, oh yeah, well that, South Asian men, I always assumed South Asian men were like this. Let me listen to what they've got to say. And then we're sharing a different perspective. Maybe we did stereotype a little bit, but I did, and I think we also did try to talk about what had happened in our own backyards in Melbourne with the violence against women here. But that episode. And again, I'm not trying to kind of defend our perspective, but basically that episode was, there'd been some horrific incidents in Pakistan, and we didn't want to shy away from it. We didn't want to say, it's our community, let's brush it under the rug. If anything, we should talk about it. We should discuss it, and this is why we really wanted to have you on the show.
Yeah, I was going to say probably.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go.
No, go.
I was just going to say my only kind of maybe the only kind of change that maybe we'd probably want to make to the title is maybe just to clarify the topic, because we're technically doing almost like a part 2 now, but this is more a focus on Bangladesh, whereas the first podcast was more a focus on Pakistan. So this is more something that's going to be narrowed and laser focused on the events that are currently happening in Bangladesh. And maybe for people who don't know, maybe I'll just give maybe a quick summary for people who aren't aware. So recently, a bunch of protests have erupted in Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, after a video emerged showing several men stripping and attacking a woman from a disadvantaged community in the southern district of Noakhali. Several members of the ruling party of a student wing were arrested several weeks prior, and this was a separate event. So another group of students were also arrested several weeks prior and charged with gang raping a woman in northern Sylhet. And this has kind of led to mass protests happening. And recently, the Bangladeshi government approved the death penalty for rape cases.
I thought that was a draft. Has it been confirmed?
Yeah. So so it's currently in the works. I don't know if it's passed at the moment, but they approved the death.
It's passed.
They approved.
So
it has. Okay. So
it was drafted a few days ago, but I wasn't sure if it got.
So it approved it going forward. So currently, that is currently the.
So did the Bangladeshi government make a change to the legislation in breakneck speed? Is that what I'm hearing? This is Bangladesh.
Well, when international media is involved, pass laws.
They start to care. One thing that I realized with the subcontinent is they're very reactive. So if a story really takes the storm, right? They will react to kind of show that they're progressive and they're making the changes. They're bringing about, the revolution, because I don't know what the political environment is when it comes to Bangladesh, but I know for a fact in Pakistan, the term change it's almost like synonymous with like every new party that wants to take the throne, right? So they will take these moments, these key moments that have big media attention, has a lot of uprising happening, they will take that, they'll make a change, but it's always, I say it is always too late, because the way that it's implemented in a lot of cases, and the way it's misused, because a lot of these legislations, when they're written up, they're not, they're half thought, they're half-assed for the most part. People use them, the elites would use them against a poor person, say, oh, this person raped my sister,
And just
and
to
I'm
add
going to
to
fabricate that evidence, and next thing you know, this person's either dead or chemically castrated. So there's all these other issues. It's not as simple as just passing back.
to add to Samad's point. Sorry,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, okay. To add to Samad's point, I think it's like you look at the micro level, you see like how Bangladeshi families kind of interact, like honor and reputation is a thing. So for the country itself, it's a reflection of that. Cases and stories like this that have come out, and now that the international world know about it, they have to protect, their reputation somehow.
Yeah.
So it's to save face.
I want to take this opportunity then to come back to you, Isaba. Now, I know that we didn't finish your how did you phrase it? Shit sandwich. And maybe we'll come back to that.
Are we getting to the middle bit?
I feel like
I think we're still on the bread. I think we're still on
the bread. If we come back to now just this issue in Bangladesh and your perspective, do you think these legislative changes, which just to be clear about it, is will now basically try rapists with the death penalty? Do you think that will make a difference?
The thing is, I was reading up on this earlier. Because I was comparing in terms of Australia's sentencing for rape cases to Bangladeshi, what the, not necessarily that they received that much time, but what it was in terms of legislation. It was between 10 years to life. In Australia, it's the sentence tends to be about 10 years. You can get less than that. We saw in terms of sexual assault, we saw George Pell received less than that, and a lot of lawyers actually said that might have been quite harsh in terms of following precedent, right? So we know that when it comes to sentencing, it's not something that's quite unique to Bangladesh for what they have in legislation. And so I don't know if that's what the problem is. We know when it comes to sexual assault cases, and I'm not specifically, that's another thing I wanted to bring up, and is that when it comes to sexual violence, it's not always rape, right? And we need to acknowledge that. And these discussions that we are having, they're important. But again, it is kind of reactive because we are talking about it when an extreme case of rape has happened. A lot of rape is quite invisible. A lot of sexual assault is quite invisible, right? When what we do know is that it's actually a myth that people report immediately, right? With the limited amount of reporting that does happen. A lot of rape cases and a lot of sexual assault cases actually happens over a long period of time. So I think in a lot of countries all over the world, whether it's here or whether it's in Bangladesh, there needs to be more focus in when it comes to support services available for women who are experiencing these types of things. We're talking when we're talking about criminalizing rape, which it is already criminal if we're talking about this death penalty, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to encourage people to come forward, right? What can we do to encourage people to come forward? Because even the trial process itself can be quite traumatic for women because they will need to be reliving their experiences over and over again. They're going to be cross-examined, which can be traumatic in itself. They're going to ask really, really insensitive questions at times. So it's not just, okay, we need to increase the punishment for the sanction for rape or sexual violence. You've done that. But then what? Does that necessarily mean that it's going to change? Because for something that is so invisible, and for something that is so underreported.
Yeah.
So I think that's something, No.
I was just going to say, last time when we were talking about it, it was brought up that I think I think maybe the lawyer of a rapist was pointing out that, well, if you charge a rapist with the death penalty, if you make it the standard, it will only kind of lead to rapists also using homicide as a measure after rape.
Yeah, murdering the women afterwards.
I think it was that Indian guy. The Indian guy.
Yeah, it was the.
Oh, it was the Indian guy. Sorry.
Yeah.
It
was from
the
India's
2012 Delhi rape case.
Yeah,
from the Delhi rape case. Yeah.
And the thing is, I went and looked it up for this podcast as well. 88% of criminologists also don't believe that the death penalty is a deterrent against homicide. So if we're just using homicides as an example, they also would suggest it would be a deterrent for something like rapes either. And even a study that came out in 2012 by the National Academy of Science said that they concluded, quote, concludes that the research to date is not informative about whether capital punishment decreases, increases, or has no effect on the influence of homicide rates and should not influence policy judgments on capital punishment. So in the end, even the literature that we have available doesn't show that, putting people to death leads to a decrease in the amount of a crime happening either. So I think very much like what Isaba was saying, that it does seem very reactive, because it seems like a very a guttural reaction to something that is obviously horrible, right?
It's also, sorry, go ahead, Isaba.
No, also just going on top of that, there's evidence to show that chemical castration of people who commit sexual violence doesn't actually necessarily stop sexual violence.
Yes, I've heard that too.
Yeah. So because it's a power issue, you guys talked about that last time as well. That it is an issue of power. So you can try all of these things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to stop the behavior.
Yeah, and I think, these cases or incidents of brutal rapes is not new, and you alluded to that earlier, Isaba. But it seems like since the 2012 Delhi incident, there's been protesting every time this happens within some countries, and the protesters, they want legislative change, and they want to bring back the death sentence for this. And we've seen that in India, they've brought that back. We've seen that the calls. I think there's already death sentence in Pakistan, if I'm correct.
They have a death sentence for
lots of
so
things.
many things.
And now in Bangladesh, and I think we'll start to see maybe the death sentence re-emerge in not just South Asian countries, but across Asia, and maybe even in the West. It's interesting. You have that in the United States, but it to me it seems more like a copycat as well. That country India did it, and so we're going to do it as well, even though the data doesn't say or doesn't suggest that it improves or decreases the probability of women enduring these incidents.
I think just for the common people and people that don't read the data and don't really know what we're talking about right now, for them it might seem like a quick kind of fix. So for them it's like appeasing the audience, or
appeasing the masses. It's like, oh, we're going to kill them.
Yeah, and they'll be like, oh, it's a quick.
But it doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't solve the problem of there being incidents of sexual violence to people, to the general. It's like you're trying to provide the medicine, but you're not finding out the pathology about why does it occur in this region at the high rates that it does.
I mean, the in case of what happened in Pakistan, the Pakistani Prime Minister actually suggested that they're going to chemically castrate the perpetrators. I think, for them, they might consider that to be the rightful solution. But I think that also shows that they don't understand, what sexual violence is, because, it starts from a very small stages. It starts, what they would consider innocent, right? It starts with touching, with comments, and those things will carry on. And like Sabo, you mentioned, that is not a solution to the violence itself, because it may carry on in other ways. And I think, again, the issue lies in education, educating the masses on what the boundaries are.
I think
because they
we
aren't.
spoke about it last episode.
Yeah, we were
Yeah,
talking about.
I do want to get your perspective here, Isaba. Again,
Yeah.
is we talked about some of the things towards the end of that episode 7 around maybe some things that we can do within our communities to highlight whenever these locker room talk happens and how to shut that down. But that's, I think, there's a lot there that we didn't talk about, and I wanted to get your perspective because, sure, increasing sentencing is one way. Again, the data suggests that maybe that's not as effective. From your perspective, what are some more effective ways that are preventative rather than reactive?
In terms of sexual violence and rape amongst women, I think it is cultural change in terms of the perception of women, of who they are. There are other things that are involved here. It's not just a culture change, and it's not just legislation. We need to recognize that there are a whole bunch of issues in any country that might contribute to this, right? But in terms of something that is quite common and something that we can participate in, I do think that it is about perception of women, and it is about, we need to recognize that it's not going to happen overnight, and we need to recognize that it is something that is quite frustrating, right? And we need to also recognize that these are conversations that women have been having for a long time, and it's a very, very slow process. I think it is about having people on board, particularly males on board, and understanding and trying to see things from that perspective. And I'm going to bring up another thing that came up from the podcast. It was that discussion about how men might feel insecure now about closing the door when they're having a meeting with a woman one-on-one.
We're going into kind of Me Too territory.
Me Too stuff, yeah.
Yeah, Me Too.
Yeah, okay.
And now I'm going to talk about a personal experience here, and because that's what it brought up, a personal experience. So when, as a young woman, as a child, I've always been told never be in a room alone with a male teacher. Yeah, my mum has always taught me that. Or make sure that the door is never closed. And there's been a couple of times in my life where particularly in high school, where the door was closed, right? The door was closed. And I remember while I'm sitting down, and it was just for feedback for an assessment, and I remember a few of those times I thought, man, if my mum finds out that I'm alone in this room with this guy, she's going to kill me, right? And it's about taking that away, because there are a lot of things in life that young people, particularly young people, they might do that their parents might not agree with. And then the consequence, not necessarily a consequence while they are doing that. So let's say, like, from a conservative background, I go out clubbing, right? And then I go out clubbing and I am sexually assaulted by someone, whether it's somebody known to me or not known to me. I shouldn't have to feel fear that I'm going to be told off by my parents that I've gone clubbing. Why did I go clubbing?
Yeah.
Right? What I should be feeling is that I have a safe space to tell my parents that regardless of what I've done, somebody has violated me, and that is not okay.
Yeah.
And when it comes to men feeling that insecurity, I understand that men might feel that insecurity, that there's this fear that they might be accused of something. But statistically speaking, that the evidence for that is practically non-existent. That in terms of that it's easy to lie about sexual assault. That's actually not the case.
Well, let me just put a clarification on my statement.
Yeah.
This was something that has been reported by like business firms themselves. It's not necessarily a statistic, but more showing that workplace culture itself is changing, and that there are men in managerial positions who previously wouldn't have had any kind of issues when it came to interacting with their co-workers, but now they have to be more attentive of their surroundings, such as what I said with leaving the door open. It's not to say that women are now actively going to falsely accuse a manager of misconduct, but more that these are now the behavioral workplace changes that are happening at the moment as a direct response to the Me Too movement.
Is that
I get that, and
is that such a bad thing though?
No, it isn't.
So
It isn't.
That's my point.
No, it isn't. But the problem is that because now that there is before, because of so one thing I guess to clarify, would you say that the vast majority of people who engage in things like rape or men, well, we use men specifically, men who engage in sexual violence or sexual assault or rape make up a minority of the population?
Absolutely, it's minority.
Absolutely.
Would you agree, Saba? Sorry for putting you on the spot, but
I think when it comes, when it comes to, I don't necessarily think that most men are violent towards women in terms of trying to seek out forcefully force out sexual gratification from them. But then again, we do have these microaggressions that take place, which men, while they're doing it, might not be conscious of. So that is something that we need to be conscious of.
Microaggressions and sexual assault and rape are completely different things. My question is,
I don't know whether they're completely different. It comes down to power, right? So
microaggressions are necessary. Well, you can't conflate microaggressions with rape.
No. When we talk about like power and the power dynamics between kind of men and women, the microaggressions play into that picture, right? Sure. So it's certainly not. I mean, as egregious as rape.
I think it's something that's, if not unchecked, like can lead to things that.
We have a female perspective, so let's ask.
I completely agree that microaggressions are directly like correlated in any way to rape. But my main question is, men who participate or criminally act and commit rape and sexual assault, would you say that they make up a minority of the population? That's the question.
Look, can I answer that in terms of, again, it is about perception as well, because there was a report in The Guardian last year where there was they did a survey amongst young men asking them if a woman consents to sex and then withdraws consent, is it still considered as rape? Nearly half of the men actually said no, it doesn't consist. It's not considered as rape. Yeah. So it is about cultural perception here, right? So I'm not necessarily saying that people are actively seeking to exert that power, that most men are actively exert that power. But I don't necessarily think that men are always thinking that the actions that they take can have a negative impact on a woman in those sorts of circumstances, particularly when it comes, I mean, in that sort of circumstance, it is considered rape.
Yeah. When a woman rescinds their consent, it is rape.
Yeah, and I think that what you were trying to show or demonstrate there, Saba, is that even though there's a perception that if you look at that statistic, that if 50% of men, if that statistic is correct, that 50% of men,
not 50%, it was close to,
are suggesting that if after the fact she withdraws her consent, so I mean they haven't done anything yet, but she's withdrawn her consent after providing consent, that the man wouldn't consider that to be rape. If that statistic,
so it's not after not having done anything, so it can be midway or it's any time during the sexual act. If she withdraws the consent, is it considered as rape?
Yeah, legally it is. Legally it is. But ultimately, what I'm trying to get at is, the vast majority of men, right? So men, 50% of the population, the men that do commit rape, do they make up a significant population of men? This is my first question.
Repeat that question again.
So the men that commit rape, do they make a significant portion of the male population? So it's like 40% or 10% or 1%. No. And this kind of goes back to the same thing with my topic on when we were talking about male managers or men in positions of power, right? The vast majority of them aren't using their power to exert and take advantage of people. But the ones that do are the ones that can severely scar people, harm them, and take advantage of them. Now,
add another perspective on before you finish your thought here, I want to relate this back to, it's kind of like, again, Isaba, you said about perception. And so if there's a small number of bad apples, let's call them that, because I want to relate this to, the whole Black Lives Matter thing as well, is that if there's a bunch of bad apples in the police, and those bad apples, within that community of people, they're quite confronting, then the perception is that all police officers behave in this way, but it's only a small number of bad apples. And the case would be the same here, is that even if you were to argue that the vast majority of men don't behave in this way, but the perception would be if there's a small number of bad apples, they can do a lot of damage and they can do a lot of harm.
Yeah, and that's correct. And the thing is, and what has been reported in these businesses, the vast majority of men aren't engaging in these kind of illegal criminal activities, such as taking advantage of men and women. But because of the change in work structure, they have had to now change the way that they usually used to behave, which wouldn't have been something that was to them perceived as something negative, such as closing the door. If you're not a criminal, you're not going to have any problem with being alone in a room with a woman, right? But if you're somebody who is going to engage in a criminal sexual act, then you closing the door would be part of your plan, right? Now, for the vast majority, now this is why I was asking you before about whether you thought that the vast majority of men, whether they made up, whether rapists or male rapists made up a significant portion of the population, because the ones that aren't are now going to be more protective about how they behave around people, even to the point that it might be harmful to what would usually have been just regular behavior. Because, from a cultural perspective, leaving a door open or closed really doesn't mean much. But in context of what they have to be aware of, that's what I was saying more about a cultural change. Yes, it is a good thing to leave the door open now, given the situation around Me Too. But the other thing that I also pointed out in the podcast was, well, now they're talking about how they don't have private meetings anymore. Now they have to have somebody also in the room with them, so a third party watching the meeting too. Now, this isn't to say that it's happening in every environment, but it is something that's been reported as a change that they've made.
So what I would say to that is, I think the first thing is there needs to, if there is this fear of women, because it seems that I guess to be against that idea, and we're talking about just keeping the door open, right?
Well, yeah, whatever it may be, yeah.
So let's just keep it to keeping the door open. We need to trust that women are intelligent enough to know that not all men commit sexual acts, sexual violence.
Yeah,
we need to trust that. That's the first thing. The second thing is, though, that women do have their everyday lives, the fear of being attacked. Like, we organize our lives around going out in groups, making sure that the door is open, right? Because that's our responsibility. Making sure, mum always made sure that she had my phone number and a friend's phone number. My brother might not necessarily have had to do as much, right? So all of these things, that this fear that is not that the fear that is within women, because culturally we've been taught that this is something that can happen to you. And we've seen these in the media as well. Why don't we change the narrative a little bit and saying, okay, women don't try, women, we have to change our lives around because a female might accuse us of sexual assault, and change the narrative to, let's keep the door open. Let me keep the door open so that she can feel a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah, that is a way that you can I guess reframe the notion of what they're doing.
It's just a perspective, right? It's a perspective of making an environment feel safe for everyone instead of preventing it being preventive. We're not trying to be preventive. If our mindset is more about security and comfortability for everyone, right? And keeping the door open doesn't really mean anything, right?
But no,
Like
it doesn't. No, it
yeah,
doesn't. But the thing is that ultimately, even if you try to reframe it as something like that, it will be ultimately seen. It's a protective measure. It's not something that's done for the sake of like the woman who is having in the meeting. It's done for the protection of the company. And also like the managers who make up the reason why I pointed out is the vast majority of
you
men.
make a really good point that and I don't want to gloss over this, so that's why I'm kind of want to just come
by all
back to this point. You mentioned that much of this these changes within companies is to protect the company from litigation, not necessarily. I mean, yes, I think some of it plays a part in protecting women, but largely
it's like at least a tertiary effect.
Yeah,
maybe.
it's a side effect, but it's to protect companies, and so they want to say, well, I don't want to be I'm Fox News, and Roger Ailes has sexually assaulted dozens of women in my in my organization. What we're going to do is change the dynamics a little bit, make sure that doors are left open. If there's a woman inside, or just generally, right? It's so that they don't have to pay out tens of millions of dollars in
exactly.
hush money.
I don't actually think it's necessarily a fear of women because they're necessarily going to damage a guy's reputation. It's more like the company fears what the I guess the political and news-based ramifications that is going to happen.
I'm now afraid of Murdoch coming after me after I've just said that. So I'm
signed that. Whatchamacallit? A lot of people signed that.
I signed it.
Yeah, it's like
actually, to our listeners and viewers, they're Kevin Rudd, if you remember, Kevin 07.
Kevin 07, mate.
Former Prime Minister, maybe about a dozen Prime Ministers ago, or also known as 5 years ago. He's created a government petition to have a royal commission into News Corp and Murdoch Press. So if just do a quick Google search, go in there, and if you want to hold
make sure you sign it.
Make sure you sign it. Like
hopefully
also subscribe to our channel, but also sign that petition.
Look, if you're going to sign the petition, you might as well sign up and get subscribers.
Who told you about the petition? Mind Over Matters did. So why wouldn't you subscribe?
So I think with the petition, though, what was happening is that the website was recognizing a lot of people as bots. So a lot of
because I think there was
Russians.
like a lot of people from overseas. Because it's like the change.org petition, right? I don't know if you've ever seen those, right? But sometimes there's like country specific ones, and then people from overseas sign them, right? This is like a Australian specific kind of petition. And also it wasn't kind of because it's in Australia, it wasn't designed to handle all the information from other countries coming, so it like crashed the website like so many times, and so many times it took a while for me to sign up because every time I'd go in and it's just loading.
Yeah.
Well, let's be honest. Murdoch media is not very popular amongst people who are not considered conservative, right?
Well, it's funny because of the influence that like everybody overseas also knows. That's why there was so much attention.
I mean, look how strong they are.
Yeah. I do want to, before we kind of move on to Murdoch Press, which is a topic for another day, I want to move through the layers of this shit sandwich, Isaba.
Yeah.
So let's move up a layer. What's the next thing that I guess you want to express or critique, or just maybe a perspective we overlooked completely?
I think. I think the big thing that we really need to talk about is this idea of belief and recognizing that women are telling the truth. And I think when we do talk about that, though, we also have to understand that when sexual violence and rape happens, a lot of the times it is between family members. And that was something that was mentioned quite a few times, and intimate partners. And I think that's hard for some people to accept a lot of the times. And the best example of that is actually Michael Jackson, and the amount of people that have the conversation of, I don't believe it or I do believe it, because they have this love for Michael Jackson, and they can't comprehend that somebody that they love so much, or somebody who's
someone they
living music
idolize.
they've idolized, can commit something so bad.
Yeah.
And so
Bill Cosby.
then when it, sorry?
Bill
Bill
Cosby.
Bill Cosby, yeah, absolutely. And so then so that's somebody that's not family. But what if it's a family member? And then you have to make that decision, right? Particularly if it's abuse between siblings. Yeah, how does a parent make a choice? These are huge issues, and we also need to recognize that because it's a partner, right, or because it's a family member, a lot of people might feel quite reluctant to seek help or to report it, because it doesn't necessarily mean that they hate that person. They might still have love for that person. That person might have done something that's really, really bad to them and to them, but it doesn't necessarily take away from the other parts of a person. And that's another thing that we need to also recognize. I think that a person, this idea of a person, I think you mentioned Roger Ailes.
Roger Ailes.
Roger Ailes.
I mean, Roger something, we don't know.
Something.
Yeah.
Well, technically, he was bought out towards the end, so he doesn't belong to Murdoch Media anyway, right? 40 million he got out of that company.
It's amazing what you can get when you sexually assault dozens of women in your company. It's 40 million.
So over the weekend, we were actually watching both the Showtime show, which was The Loudest Voice, also Bombshell, which was the movie. Yeah. And in the movie, Megan Kelly, she was saying that when she was talking to her husband, and she was saying that he did something really bad, but she actually grew to love this person because there were all these other characteristics of him, that he was a generous person. You know, he always helped people. And so this idea that a person who is committing sexual violence or sexual assault, violence, rape against someone, that they're bad in every aspect of their lives, is actually not necessarily true. And so it can be quite difficult for people to process belief sometimes because of those reasons. And we need to understand that despite that feeling of uncomfortableness, we need to understand, again, and I keep on saying this because it is something that I've experienced so many times when this subject comes up, how do we know that she's telling the truth? That comes up so often, and often it is the first question that comes up.
Yeah.
How do we know?
The validity of
that's the first question
claim
that comes up after what was she wearing?
Yeah.
Why was she there at that time?
Why was she there at that time? Yeah, it's like victim blaming.
Yeah.
I think one of the questions that I just thought, it just came to my mind because we're talking about usually where these issues do start, and it's usually within like your family circle, and these are the cases that don't normally get reported for one reason or another. It's an uncle, it's an elder, it's a brother, or sometimes it's a parent, and a lot of the times people feel like
a religious figure.
Or religious figure, yeah, definitely, yeah.
A cleric,
I mean,
a priest,
which is a pretty common thing. Because I spent the first 12 years of my life in Pakistan, and just like you were mentioning, never leave the door closed with your teacher at school. The same thing was told to me and my brother, with the person who was teaching us how to read Quran, and that's something when you take a step back and you think about it, it just completely blows your mind. Because someone who's coming to teach you how to read a religious text, could be someone who could, do something so horrendous. But that's another conversation, right? Sorry.
But
I
think it's related to our broader theme. Our theme today is about issues that affect Muslim youth. And
that is, I guess, that is something.
I was just going to ask, like, how would parents kind of engage in that conversation like to teach their kids? Like obviously your parents tell you, don't keep the door closed
Well,
for
I
whatever
think
problem
reason.
is,
there's another
Like,
conversation that I really wanted to ask Isaba about, because one of the things that I feel like, certain women might have done in the past is, someone violates them in one way or another. There's so many different ways they can do it. And they let it slide because they think this person can, you know, can
Change.
improve or change, right? And a lot of these things get unsaid. This person never, gets accounted for. Um, don't you think that's, you're really counting on a probability um, to, for things to never happen again, right? I mean, that probability
it's
could be very minimal. I would say minimal too, and that's even me being generous. Um, what do you say about people who actually go to the distance and commit something, something like an actual rape, where penetration is involved, um,
Yeah.
and within the family itself, let's say, because that is a very common thing. We
Yeah.
we might not want to
Yeah.
believe that, but the person
Yeah.
is let go because they're part of the family, and it's kind of like hush hush, and said, oh, don't do it again. What do you say about those
Yeah.
instances? Because I feel like that also needs to be addressed. And
Oh,
I hear this quite
absolutely.
I hear
Yeah.
this quite often, especially in the lower socioeconomic brackets, people with from the, I guess, like from a different part of the world, living within let's say, like a more disadvantaged community. This is more often
Yeah.
than not, it's common in that part of the world. And I'm sure it happens over here too, right? But since we were talking about Bangladesh, I'm gonna, the
Yeah.
closest relation is my own country.
No, I think the conversation is broader than that.
Yeah,
But
it is. Yeah, but the, don't you think that's a serious problem? And it's a big loophole because you let someone go because they're your family. Um,
Yeah.
or they might even be helping you out during like a tough time. I know a lot of people like, they take advantage. Again, it comes down to power. Like you have a lot
it
of
is,
like,
of course. Yeah.
people who help out their family members and they
I mean,
do these bad
crime.
acts, but
Yeah.
like, they're helping them move into, new places, give them opportunities they wouldn't have had if it wasn't for that person. But they're still doing these things that, won't get reported. And then even when they do get reported, let's say, a child tells their parent like, oh, this person did so and so to me, like the parents don't even believe them sometimes.
And I would add one more thing on top of that, on
Yeah,
top of that shit sandwich.
yeah,
And I would say, look, let's say, this person commits a crime, a sexually related crime, and it's on another family member. The top, the issue
Yeah.
gets brought up, with the elders, and they decide they're going to banish this person from the family, and that's the form of punishment. Is that sufficient, or shouldn't they, report this person
to
to
the
the
authorities.
authority?
Yeah,
Because you can't be the judge and jury, right? Like, because there's a bias, and there's a clear bias. There's leniency
Yeah.
towards giving a softer sentence because they want to help this person redeem themselves, but they never talk about what's been
I
taken
wonder,
away.
would they give the same leniency if the woman had done that, right?
Or if
If it was the
yeah,
other way around.
uh,
I
yeah, that's another yeah, that's
I
another way.
think when we're talking about reporting, though, again, we need to be conscious about what the woman wants or what the child is comfortable going through, because it is really been a traumatic experience, and whether
Right.
we would always encourage reporting, right? Because it is because somebody has committed a crime, and we want them to face the punishment for that crime.
Yeah,
But again, a lot of the times it doesn't happen immediately because it's something that is quite tough to go through.
yeah.
I think in Australia, it's only recently that there's been reforms when it comes to victims of crime, where they've put in measures that during, I guess, the committal proceedings, so pre-trial proceedings, and also when we're the actual trial process, where if the accused is defending himself, he can't. He's in that he is not actually allowed to cross-examine the victim. It has to be another lawyer who cross-examines, and also when the victim is giving their account, they do have the ability to request to be doing it through video link, or to have a barrier between the accused and themselves, or out of their, I guess, line
out
of
of the vision.
sight.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that having them seeing that person who has violated them, it can be quite traumatic, and they might freeze up, or they might not necessarily be able to give the best testimony.
Yeah.
So it is. I think when I understand that there's that loophole, but we need to be conscious of, is that person ready to go through that themselves?
Yeah, I think you're completely correct, because the one thing that I wanted to just add on to your question, Samad, is that, usually people who are victims of sexual assault, especially when you're younger, you don't even know you're a victim until much later. So you kind of, and it does lead to a lot of victims having repressed memories until they kind of, maybe they talk to someone, or they're given the information, or they're in sex ed, or whatever it may be, and then they kind of have all the pieces linked together, and it's like, oh, I was abused, right? So and you kind of dismiss a lot of things when it's someone like a family member, a father, a uncle, cousin, whatever it may be. And this kind of relates to something that I also mentioned earlier with the death sentence, right? Now, if somebody like your uncle, sexually assaulted you, and the punishment is potentially death, and your family know that, and you know that, you might be dissuaded to bring that up because, oh, I'm now killing someone. That's also another added barrier.
Yeah, I think that
could also prevent people from coming forward.
The punishment may be too severe, right? And you feel like you're gonna bring shame to your family by reporting this person, because that's also another thing, right?
Bring it to the surface. And it kind of relates back to what you were saying also about, well, them banishing someone, like, or kind of like making them an outcast from the family rather than reporting it to the authorities, is because, again, if you bring it to the authorities, it shines a light on your family and the reputation and your community, etc. All the eyes go on your family, and it's easy just to say, oh, well, yeah, he went off somewhere or whatever, right? That's the solution. That's the reason why they do something like make someone who is a sexual assault perpetrator in their family become a outcast, because it's easier to just kind of sweep it under the rug, as opposed to make it something that needs to be disinfected by having people view it and made an example. Sorry.
Yeah, I think also on that, it's sorry, did I cut someone
off?
No,
you go ahead.
No, by all means. No, cut us off always.
No, I think again with that is that we keep on talking about, in terms of the shame for the woman herself. Is she ready to deal with that? That there is stigma in terms of what was she doing, how was she in front of her uncle, what was she wearing in front of her uncle that that caused him to act that way. Regardless of the fact that it's a family member, we still have those ideas. They still exist. And I think another thing that we need to be conscious of in a lot of communities is that we try to sweep it under the rug, in the sense that we don't necessarily provide the support that young girls or women may need. And we tell them to move on, and we tell them not to speak about it to anybody, because later on somebody won't love them, or somebody won't marry them. That is huge. I mean, we build a society, we tell people that, when you grow up, this is what you need to do. These are the life events that you need to meet. One of them is to get married, and no one is going to marry you because you've been touched. Don't talk about it.
If anything, I've learned from the show so far is it's really complicated. Like, it's not like there's no silver bullet here where you can say, let's burn all rapists or perpetrators of sexual violence and assault, And there's a lot of perspectives, Isaba, that you've shared today that I hadn't considered, especially from the side of the victim. And so I wanted to thank you for that perspective. And
especially the fact that, is this person ready? I never really
I'd never
so
even
much about
considered
that. Because the way that I always saw it is like, if someone's done something wrong,
I see crime and they must be
it's like,
punished.
they must be punished, and period. Yeah.
But having the victim have to relive that experience is something that I hadn't even considered.
And I was thinking about it in terms of the case in Noah Cully. So this girl, she's on, her face is everywhere.
Yeah.
Right. So people they know who she is, and if she's not ready, there's already a pressure on her because of everything that's going on that this is the avenue that they need to go down. Yeah. These people need to be punished. There needs to be a trial. And so if she's not, she doesn't actually have that choice of not being ready in this circumstance. She has to.
I don't think, I think her family's begged not to share that video if I'm correct. And I think it was still leaked onto the media and
I mean, even like a place like Bangladesh, like let's say, she's forced into reporting it, going into trial and testifying and this and that, and then these people end up going to jail or getting death sentence. What's to say like their family don't come after her?
Well, there's likely that there might be retribution. Who knows? It's really hard to see when in like
it's all the support system that you leave the person with, right? Like, you're going to punish. Let's say you're going to punish the perpetrators, but what about the victim? What support is the victim getting to try and recover from that? And what protection?
Their view on justice for her is that the people
who killed him
are going to die, but there's consequences to that she's going to face, and not the government or anyone else.
And that's one of the things why a lot of the times these things don't get reported, because people are scared of what's to come after that. And let's say if someone, has the influence or has the resources to, get their way around it or get a shorter or a milder sentence, what's the guarantee that they're not going to do anything when they do get when they do get released, right? And what's the level of protection for the victim, past that sentencing or the execution of that sentence, right? It could be a death sentence, but there's a lot of other players in this. And
that's assuming they notified the victim that there's processes in place that notify the victim that the person who has committed the crime against them is going to be released.
That's true. That's true.
Before we move on, I kind of had a question for Isaba and want to get a perspective on it. So a thing that I've seen a lot, especially like, from young men, is the idea of like disenfranchisement. A lot of guys feel like they don't really have a place in society today. And this is just like from online, what I've seen. Like you look at Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, all that. I know Reddit's not the best place to go.
4chan.
4chan, those places. But it does exist. We can't ignore that, these people are around.
It is definitely an ever-growing problem.
There's a community of them called incels, I believe.
And that's what I was getting to. Like you have a community of people who are incels, right? Whether they're voluntary, involuntary, whatever.
If maybe we can just, for the audience that doesn't know what that term means, involuntary celibate. So they've taken a few letters from the first word and a few from the second. But incel just means that they, by no choice of their own, are they partnerless or don't have a girlfriend. And if I'm correct, it's a male group. I'm not sure if there's an incel.
From what I've seen, I've seen online being referred to femcells. So that's what I've. So again, it's just borrowing parts of one word and just making another, right?
But to go on to that, like even if a lot of these people don't commit any of these acts, they kind of show behavior or in their language, they kind of show kind of dangerous characteristics when they speak, especially when it's about women. Like how would society go about addressing these people? Because it's dangerous, like the thoughts and sentiments that they have just because they're involuntary celibates. Like
what do they call it?
Yeah.
Rapey vibes, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like how do you address that, and how like
Look, um, I think people like that will always exist. I think people like that will always exist, but I do think, again, it's about conversations that we have with young men, um, and about changing the culture in terms of our perception of women.
Yeah.
I think one that will make most conservative people feel quite uncomfortable is actually talking about pornography with young kids.
Yeah.
And discussing with them that what they see, because at the end of the day, whether we like to admit it or not, most young men and women will have access to it in some way or another, whether they actively go out and
especially in the
seek it for
West. Yeah.
themselves. Yep. Or whether, and I
No,
don't
it's
necessarily
no,
think it's just in the West. I think it's
Yes,
going around
yeah,
everywhere.
it's
It's
spread
Yeah,
everywhere.
if you have a phone, it's not that difficult,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, you know,
I
just
mean,
need
I'm just
internet
thinking some
and
countries have
anything.
those firewalls to block those sites.
People
Oh,
find
they're
ways around
Yeah, I know
equally-
young
Find
people
ways.
have VPNs. I know how
Yeah.
you guys operate. Don't
There's
worry.
ways around it.
There's a
Keep
will,
tabs
there's a
on
way.
all of you. Don't worry.
But it's really important to have those conversations, and the conversations about that what you see on there is not actually real, and the bodies that you see on there are necessarily are not necessarily what most women even look like. I think there's a huge issue with young women in terms of their own bodies because of what they see there. And in terms of what they should be doing, I think I was reading a while ago, and I still remember it because it's something that stayed in my mind for such a long time. And it was a couple of years ago. There was a study done, and they were talking about sexual activity in young kids. And one of the girls, she was saying that she provides oral sex to male classmates because that means that they will like her.
Goodness me.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm on this show. We don't shy away from
Yeah.
spicy topics, and I feel like that is a topic that around pornography and image and what the impact
Perception.
of that and perception. I feel like that's an episode in itself.
We'd love Saba to join us for
and
that one.
and I'd like
Just
our
throwing it
audience.
out there.
I'd like our audience to tell us if they want us to cover a very spicy topic like that.
I'm watching the chat. Just let
don't
us
all
know.
speak at once, chat.
Yeah.
I think
they'll let us know.
Yeah, I think talking about that in terms of when it comes to sexual violence is having that discussion about bodies, right, with young kids. It is about changing culture. So the Royal Commission that took place in 2015, it was on family violence, and a lot of they were talking about family violence, and they were talking about sexual violence in there as well, because a lot of the times they go hand in hand. And every single one of the recommendations in that Royal Commission in the report was actually they've committed to actually following through, and a lot of it is about cultural change. And cultural change in terms of at a grassroots level having these conversations. I think we shy away from these conversations way too often. And when we shy away from these conversations, we're allowing we're at this weird point right now where the conversations are happening, but it feels like men, particularly when we're talking about incels, they feel like we're attacking them specifically in terms of trying to seek comfort in our day-to-day lives. And I think as human beings, we actually deserve that comfort, to not go out in fear. And I talk about fear as if it's an anxiety. I'm not talking about it in terms of it being us always living anxiety and always hyperventilating about that a man is going to attack us. That's not the fear that I'm talking about. The fear is when we go out that this is something that we need to be aware of, that this is something that might happen to us. And we're consistently seeing it in media. We're consistently seeing it. We need to have a conversation with men and with boys that if a female gives consent and sends a picture of themselves to them, that doesn't mean that they have consented to that picture being shared. That is a violation, and they need to understand
it's
that
also
that's a
a
violation.
criminal act, like, because even I remember like even during my time in high school, right? Photos were like that, obviously shared around and stuff, and a lot of people didn't realize that, like, you know, it's a minor. You have a picture of a minor on your phone that counts as child pornography, and you know, having that is a criminal offense. Like, you could go to jail for that, go on a registry for that stuff, and you know, people just think, oh, you know, whatever, it's this girl I know, I have her on my phone, like, look how cool I am. It's just, sometimes it's even like a social status thing within like high schoolers, like, you know, that whole
Isaba, you're a school teacher, and what are schools doing to tackle this?
So in terms of, there's a lot of digital citizenship, this idea of how to conduct yourself online for both young men and women. It's not necessarily just focusing on pornography. There's also a lot of cyberbullying issues that we talk about. One of the things that's happened in terms of online technology for teachers, it's actually made our jobs outside of the physical workspace now. So we really need to, when it comes to us, so if we see something that's happening between school kids online, even if it's after school hours, it's something that we need to try and control, and try to go through restorative practices between the kids and fix those relationships up, right? It is very difficult try to navigate, because the kids are always 2 steps ahead of us as well. Again, when we had I was having this conversation with my sister-in-law about if we my brother was saying that his daughter will never have social media until she's, I don't know, 16 or 17 or 18. And I'm like, look, if she has a device, she will find a way to hide it from you. And it's really, I don't necessarily think taking those things away is the way to resolve an issue. It is more about teaching them and guiding them in a safe way that these are the ways that you can use these types of technology. These are some things that can happen. Now, again, like when it comes to sexting, we also need to understand that it doesn't necessarily always mean that that it's going to spread everywhere. And it doesn't always necessarily mean that somebody has provided a picture of themselves while feeling pressured. Sometimes it's something that they are doing because that's what they want to share. But we need to recognize, and we need to understand that there may be a risk that that person that they have shared it with might share. They have the ability, right? They have the ability because they have the tools in front of them to share it with other people. And it's again, it's something. Well, why should we have to think about that? But we do.
Oh, definitely.
Well, would you say it's essentially like, I guess, educating about, you know, like, I guess in a way, responsibility, in a way, like with what you do and how to do things and how to navigate something like social media or your phone. Like, that's far more constructive way rather than constricting them and saying, oh, you can't use this or you can't.
I feel like the job of a teacher is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. Like, we're throwing more and more in your area of the fence. And it's like, okay, well,
I think it's also
forcing teachers to do what parents do. Gosh.
That's what I was going to say.
What a surprise!
These are things that parents should be doing. Teachers just help facilitate them.
It's kind of like in the US, the school provides meals to the children, because there's no guarantee that the parents, that when they're at home, that their parents will give them a square meal. And so the school has taken it on themselves to provide, breakfast and lunch to students. And I feel like we're throwing more and more onto the responsibility of teachers.
I mean, parents are pretty quick on pointing the fingers at the teacher when something does go wrong, right?
Especially when there's school fees, right? It's like,
Yeah, I mean, I mean, look, I see it all the time when it comes to parents kind of like deflecting off their own kind of responsibility. One thing that comes to mind for me is like video games, right? Like the parents will buy the child like an M-rated video game, and then be surprised that their child is playing like an M-rated like video game with like violence and stuff. Like they don't take responsibility. They then blame the people either making the video game or who sold it to them or whatever it may be, right?
I mean, my dad used to buy me like, games before I was 15, like MA games, but he just said if I catch you fighting or doing anything that was in these games, you're not allowed to play them anymore. So,
if you take the violence into the physical world,
yeah, that was
the world
trade-off.
hurt. Yeah.
Like, so what was Grand Theft Auto like a taxi simulator for you?
No, my brother never let me play Grand Theft Auto. I have to play.
He's watching. You better be careful what you say.
Yeah, I know.
I can see him watching right now. In fact, the number of watches just increased when you said that.
Even my dad would be like, if I catch you, putting your sister in a chokehold, because we used to always play WWE, like the little wrestling games. It's like if I put you in, if I see you bashing your sister, I'm gonna take your PlayStation away. So there's always that fear.
You've had that PlayStation, so you've been. Sounds like
I've had 4 of them, mate.
Yeah, you've been doing all right.
I've had all 4 of them.
In defense of parents, though, I have to say, I think a lot of that is put on parents, on teachers, is because they don't have control of other people's kids. And so the reason that it is put on teachers is because, well, we can't control what that kid is doing to my kid. You have a relationship with both, and it's like, therefore,
the one thing parents hate the most is when other people tell parents how to be parents. But it's like, they're not doing their job. Like, what are you supposed to do?
But teachers do get to do that.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Well, I know this is a really it's a big topic, and even an hour is not going to be enough to cover everything we need to. But I wanted to give you, I guess, Isaba, one more opportunity to go through that shit sandwich and see if there's anything else you want to dig up, or whether we move on to our some spicy questions that our audience have asked.
I just want to point out, like, again, the shit sandwich thing, like metaphor, is great. I love it,
and I have a feeling it's going to be a lot more in the show.
Now, yeah.
Yeah, might as well add it like a segment to the show. We haven't had the technical difficulties.
It's almost like so Adam likes to use a word called plethora, and a lot of people like to use that word too now. Like they use it for anything now. So
I now use that word even when it's not supposed to be used.
Yeah, sometimes not even in the right context. So
I've got a plethora of chips.
Sandwich.
Plethora of chips.
The evolution of the shit sandwich.
Watch that become a catchphrase on the show now. So thank you for that.
I guarantee you, if you go back to any past feedback that a teacher may have given you, you'll see a shit sandwich in there.
Yeah.
I've got plenty of those.
Most likely on all my English essays.
But is there anything else you wanted to point out before I rudely interrupted?
No, I think, look, like I said, overall, a lot of the things that we talked about is just an extension of what you guys started talking about. I don't necessarily think that it was shit. The only thing that really got me was that threw me off a little bit was the title. And I was just like, look, I don't necessarily think that living in the West means that the West is morally superior. A lot of the legislation that exists in countries like Bangladesh is legislation that came from the British, like the definition of rape, all these came from.
I want to just say that that's another great idea for another show. Is the West morally superior? And there's so much to unpack there, Isaba. But maybe we add that on our list. And just to our viewers, let us know if you want us to tackle that question. Is the West morally superior? But yeah, sorry, go ahead, Isaba.
Yeah, and I think that was the really big thing that stood out for me. Everything else, I think, we mentioned all the right things. Maybe there were things that needed to be clarified or things that needed to be extended on, but I did enjoy it. So that's the last part. Good. You did great.
Hey, is that how this? Oh, that's how this should say. There's like there's compliment critiques and then a final compliment. I like it. I like it. An excellent way.
Final review.
Final review. I was gonna say, like, in terms of you know, what's happening in, like, you know, Bangladesh and India, Pakistan, and all that. What do you think needs to, or maybe might be like a solution or some change that needs to happen within those countries to try and make it you know, make it easier for maybe victims to come forward, or maybe more easier for, I guess, you know, like rape to be defined. Like, for example, like the Bangladeshi Penal Code 375 has a rape exemption, which says, quote, sexual intercourse by a man with his own wife, the wife not being under 13 years of age, is not considered rape, right? And so that's an example to me that highlights, well, yeah, that's a really big problem, because the vast majority of rapes usually happen by, as we mentioned earlier, like somebody that you know. And if it's like your husband or something, and like the police aren't gonna you know, charge your husband for raping you because it's not against the law technically, right? So like that's where I see like has to be like one particular area of change. Do you know where other areas that maybe, like, you know, maybe the Bangladesh, if you were given authoritarian control over Bangladesh right now, what would be something maybe that you
what's the Prime Minister's name? If you were Sheikh Hasina, what would you do?
Yeah, what would you what would be something that you
not jump off a bridge?
I would run.
And not embezzle. We're trying to.
We already know Sheikh Hasina does that.
We're trying to stop all these prime ministers from embezzling. God damn it.
Okay. Look, it's hard, because I think one thing that I hope that I got across here is that there are so many layers. There are so many different parts that you need to look at. We're talking about we're talking about criminal procedures. We're talking about mental health support. We're talking about support for family and victims, protecting victims after the perpetrator has been released. If we are talking about power dynamics, so we're seeing a lot of gang rapes happening. A lot of these gang rapes, that means that, to me, that says that it is from an informal economy that exists in Bangladesh, right? So when we're talking about informal economy, we're talking about an illegal economy. How they police themselves, they have their own set of rules, and one of the ways that they exert their power is through sexual violence. Right, so that's another thing that we need to address. We need to talk about the relationship between our, I guess, our ideas of sexual violence and the way that we view sexual violence and our ideas of religion. Right, you guys talked about that last time as well. All of these things. I mean, it's not a one solution.
Yeah,
it's not a
lot of things.
Things
need to change.
There are so many things that you need to change, and so it's not going, and that's why it's not going to happen overnight. These are things that need to, and I think the main point that I would like to get across is we've started at sanction. Okay, so we've reacted. You know, we've reacted to what's happening. There's been a lot of political pressure being put on, and the reaction that we've had is that we've introduced the death sentence for rape. Now what? Do we have processes in place that make sure that is actually followed through? Right. So when we're talking about in Bangladesh, they were talking about change,
right?
Yeah, and correctly. They were talking about in Bangladesh that there were changes, there were the law reforms that took place where police officers had to take in information if a rape is being reported. They have to. However, it's not always followed through, and nothing's being done about that.
I mean, all the time I hear
it's actually a crime not to take that information. Yeah,
all the time I hear.
Then what?
All the time I hear in Bangladesh about how like corrupt the cops are and how you can just slip them money and they'll just do stuff for you, right? It wouldn't be beyond them to also not follow through with something that they may not ideologically agree with. They might just not follow through with a case because they disagree with something that's happening and just slow roll it and put it at the back of a priority list, right? So there's a lot of
this is the thing is no matter, there's a lot to be done, and some of that can't be or most of that is not legislative changes, but it's cultural changes. But in a country where, and again, I don't want to single Bangladesh out here, but in countries where there's systemic and widespread corruption at all levels.
I mean, we can do as low as household, right? Like there's corruption
at all levels. Right, from like your low level jobs all the way up to government officials, right to the Prime Minister herself, and countries where that is corruption is widespread, introducing legislation that is rarely enforced, or the procedures are not followed, or women go to report these cases, and the police don't want to hear about it, so they turn them away. Like this is just, or the police get paid off, right? The victim will slip them 1,000 taka, 10,000 taka, 1 lakh, whatever it is, depending on how much the severity of the case and how much money they have, and the issue's gone away. And I feel like there's a big part of this is to solve the corruption before you can make any really improve the lives of women and improve the lives of all other groups of people in those countries. You have to stop the corruption, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't make all the other changes that you need to, but it feels like there's this constant resistance or force pushing back, and that force is the force of corruption.
I think there's another thing that needs to be changed, and I think I'll talk from from the Muslim community's point of view. It's I think Isaba, you briefly mentioned it as well. It's the narrative and how we all view women, and who we determine to be a good person and who we determine to be a bad person. And I see these stereotypes being used in, I'm not gonna point out that this is a constant thing, but I have heard this in certain sermons or certain lectures, where anyone who's wearing, let's say, a short dress or a revealing dress or revealing clothes is viewed as someone who's promiscuous, or someone who's putting herself out there. Look, whatever their intentions are, we'll never know for sure, right? Like people do things, and it's not one thing doesn't mean that this is the reason why they're doing, and they could have many reasons. Maybe they like dressing that way, whatever the case may be, but it doesn't mean that this person is bad, even if sorry.
No, so I think on that, I'm going to link two things here, in terms of what somebody is wearing, or if we're talking about rape, the definition of rape in Bangladesh is specifically towards women. It doesn't include men, and it doesn't include men, and it doesn't include the trans community. And right. I'm mentioning the trans community on purpose here.
I'm glad you did, because we will come back to that in a moment.
Yeah, that's a serious issue as well. Yeah,
a lot of people don't necessarily agree with that, right? It's sinful. So if it's sinful, therefore it's okay according to the legislation, because it is not considered as rape. It's something that is allowed to happen to them. When we allow these types of violations to happen to people because they are a certain way, right? Yeah. Whether it's the way that they're dressing, or whether it's their sexuality, or whether anything, right? The message that we're giving out to people is that it is okay for you to police other people. It is okay to take this. You are seeing something that is wrong. You don't need to have any sort of scholarship in anything, whether it's religion or the law or whatever. And based on what you are seeing, you can go and action because it's sinful. And that is just ridiculous. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I'll
absolutely ridiculous.
Further that by saying, even like you hear about women that go to Hajj, right? Which is like the holiest place.
Yeah, they get
any Muslim. They're wearing fully covered stuff as you would in a place like Hajj, and they're with a partner or like a family member, as you have to be, as a woman in Hajj,
and having a mahram.
Having a mahram, and you're still getting women still complain that they get groped, they get touched
while they're doing tawaf. Like,
while
this recently I've heard this and I was completely like blown
No,
away.
I've heard this from like ages ago. So I was always like, where are these people that are saying, oh, it's
Yeah,
the
why
way you're
isn't that part of
dressed.
the
Like,
conversation?
why? Yeah, where are these
Because it's
people? And
inconvenient.
these things,
That's
yeah.
why.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously that's the answer, but like, you know, there's just so much double standard, and to take that further, like you look at Bangladesh, um, you'll have all these religious leaders that say, oh, women shouldn't be doing this and that, trying to. They might be right, they might be wrong. I don't know. That's up to people's interpretations, but they're saying a lot of things that women should and shouldn't be. But when it comes to topics like rape, they don't even talk about it at all. And I think that's.
And I think I'll tell you.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I'll tell you in terms of my experience when I went a couple of years ago, it's not that it just happened once. Yeah, I was groped at least 3 or 4 times. And for me, it felt like my attention is to be here and to focus on my relationship with God. And this is, I mean, is to have this, it's to focus on my relationship with God. And you're taking that away from me. You're taking my focus and my attention away from that and it to something else, something that I would expect to not happen to me and I would expect to feel safe in. The fact of the matter is, though, before going, I was warned, right? I was warned by multiple people that when you are going, make sure that you have a family member standing behind you, right? And it still happened. And so it's something on another level, because now you're talking about spirituality, and if it's for people where spirituality is a huge thing, where it is their coping mechanism sometimes to deal with other things that are going on in their lives, to now take that away from them because it can be something traumatic. That's another form of violation.
I mean, the whole
Yeah.
point of everyone going to Hajj, not just like you or like the other women, but the men who do these things as well that are over there, isn't their intention there the same as your intention to be there? So like, why
criminals don't care that they're breaking the law? Like, I'm just gonna put it out there.
No, of course, but I think the question is,
the question
it's
is
not
like,
an easy process to get there, right? Like, it's not like you just
there's
bought
like
a ticket
visas
to.
involved.
It's
all these things involved, but
I think it comes back to
individuals, right?
It is individuals, but people who are like this, if they see a crowd and they think they can get away with it, they're not gonna be restrained by the fact that God is watching, because it's not like God is just watching when they're doing Hajj. God is watching, outside of Hajj too, and and so it's these people are opportunistic, and whether they were in Hajj or whether they went into a mosh pit, or a concert or a crowded area, they would do the same. And I'm sure during Boxing Day sales in Melbourne, these people would be out in force, right?
Yeah, I'm definitely sure I got groped last Boxing Day. I was at Chad's.
That was me.
Guys said, "Oh, okay, so it's not okay."
But it's
also that idea of, if you go to Hajj, all of your sins. It's like everyone was asking me, so what are the top 3 things that you're going to do before you go to Hajj? Because you can do anything and it's like, fine. God will forgive
clean
you.
state, clean slate.
And we forget that when it comes to from an Islamic perspective. If we talk about the justice in terms of God forgives sins related to our relationship with Him, but not a right that we've taken away from somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's for us to. Anyway,
the logic of these people. Let me quickly sneak in a sexual assault before I complete my Hajj.
Yeah,
right.
That's it.
I don't even think
sexual assault.
You see that's giving them too much. They're thinking ahead. They don't care. These kind of people, like you said, Simon, are opportunistic. Yeah. They don't care about the fact that they're committing crimes. They just will take advantage of any situation, take advantage of people if that means that they can get away with it. And it's horrible to hear that.
There's a thought. Sorry, go on.
No. By all means.
There's a thought I just had. Just randomly while you guys were talking, is like in the Bangla language, there's actually many ways to, you call them opportunistic. There's many ways to kind of like many names for these people in the
I
Bangla
only know
language.
the swear words in Bangla.
Okay, there's a lot of words to like describe these people, and I'm like, wow, like for it to be a part of our language,
Can you
like it must have.
Can you share those words? Like, are you?
We won't get
I don't know.
we won't get kicked off YouTube.
They,
At least.
they
I
won't
mean, I know-
understand.
No one understand. Try me, YouTube bot.
I know for sure. Like in Bangla, there's the word like locha. I don't
Oh
know.
goodness!
Yeah.
He went
So
there.
I don't know the context of. I don't know how bad that word might be, but I know that it does mean like people who are
Yeah, I think it
opportunistic
just
in
means
those
like
types.
loose.
Loose, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think it means worse.
Does it?
It's
I think it means
Mm.
usually people who, are a bit creepy.
yeah.
Creeps. Yeah.
Morally
Sneaky.
kind
Yeah.
of
freaks.
Morally
Freaks.
ambiguous.
ambiguous
Yeah.
is still being too nice. I
Yeah,
think.
that's still being nice. But the point I was trying to make is like even within the language, there's so many ways to describe these people, so many words for them. It's like, this must have existed a long time ago for them to be so many words, and they still haven't addressed it. I don't know. It's just a
It's
thought
an
I had.
interesting perspective.
Well, I mean, opportunistic people will always exist in human
Yeah.
society, unfortunately,
Oh.
because it is still like, well, whether or not, because it's not necessarily a negative trait to be opportunistic, right? But people who engage in criminal activities that are opportunistic are obviously not.
You're
something
looking
that
at it
we
from
as
like an evolutionary perspective.
well, yeah, that's just as a background,
Yeah,
my
Mr.
background is
Biologist over here.
There you go.
So yeah, just to kind of clarify, but yeah, like people who are opportunistic are going to benefit in society when they take advantage of a situation, right? Now, in something in a context of sexual assault or violence, that's like them taking advantage of a situation that gives them a form of pleasure, right? Now, again, this is something that we've already deemed as a society as being degenerate, and therefore we've deemed it as a criminal act. And we, as a social contract, have deemed that when people do engage in this behavior, we're going to punish it in order to dissuade people from engaging in further behavior that's like this. Because again, it leads to a corruption of the people and the society that we live in. But yeah, sorry, it's just
Yeah. No.
I think that, Isaba, you mentioned that like even like the trans community, and I wanted to use that as a segue into maybe some of the spicier questions we've been getting. Our audience has been a bit quiet on the chat today, so I want you guys to ask some questions. Think about some of the maybe some of the contemporary issues that Muslim youth in the West are faced with, that might be unique to youth or Muslims in the West. So one of these questions is I guess, can you be a practicing Muslim and be gay or trans even? And I know it's a difficult. So I think we all need to answer these questions with a degree of sensitivity. But I maybe start with you, Isaba.
Yeah, that's look. How do I?
way to put her on the spot like this.
Yeah, well,
couldn't even
while
give her
you
an
think up a response to that, Isaba,
Because
there's a
also in terms of what he's practicing, like that's the first thing that came into my mind, because if I was talking to my younger brother and he was like, I'm practicing. I'm like, okay, what makes you practicing? He's like, well, I pray and I fast. That's him practicing. Well, to another person, it's someone who their whole life is defined by their religion. So in terms of what
let me rephrase it then. Let me rephrase it. If you identify as a Muslim, so this is not looking at how the level of practice that they do, but identify as a Muslim. Can you also identify as being in the LGBTQ community?
Yeah.
Why would we say that they cannot? Is my first question.
Well, I don't think we're saying that. I think we're kind of putting the question out there.
That's my question. So to the person who's asking this, my question would be, why would you feel that they're not? Because based on that, we can have that conversation. So it's about okay, why are we asking this particular question? Because again, it goes back. My assumption would be is because it's sinful, right? That if it's something that's sinful and it's part of the
if you look at the monotheistic religions or the Abrahamic faiths, homosexuality, and I'll come back to that definition, but it is considered to be a sinful act.
Yeah. So again, there are other things that we do that are sinful. We are living in a capitalist society, an interest-based society that is very sinful.
Yeah.
Does that make us not Muslim?
Yeah, I guess the distinction there is, if you're born in the country that you're in and you're a citizen of only that country, then you don't really have a choice in the matter, right? And I think I want to come back to the question about can you identify as Muslim and gay, and I think the religious perspective, or at least the Islamic perspective, and I believe from Christianity they share a similar view, is the inclination itself is not what's considered sinful from the point of view of the kind of the moral perspective of these faiths. It's not the inclination, it's the act. And so you can still be a Muslim, and you might even be quite a orthodox Muslim or a practicing Muslim or a religious Muslim, however you want to characterize yourself. But you can still, like, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or God can still instill you with certain desires and wants, and there's the religious perspective there is how do you retain your faith, but also minimize the sin that you do, and that's a question for everything. Like, if you can drink alcohol, it's sinful, but it doesn't take away from the fact that you're Muslim, right? And that is your relationship with Allah, and you can have stricter interpretations that will say that certainly does take you outside of Islam, and I always find it very interesting that some Muslims or some different groups of Muslims will say, okay, well, no, it's drinking alcohol is sinful, but doesn't take you out of the the realm of Islam. But then other things like eating pork will, or being gay will, and I'm like, well, a sin is a sin. There is a particular sin that, according to the Islamic tradition, is there's no way around that, and that's attributing the partners with God, but all other sins, if you repent, you're forgiven, right? So
you can repent. You can constantly repent. It's not like you only get one shot at it, and if you fail, it's
not like the gropers, not like the Hajj gropers, where they're like just groping
one last time.
Yeah, but
opportunistic.
It's a question that we've been asked a couple of times, and I thought while we're talking about the topic, we should address it, and we shouldn't shy away from really difficult questions like this.
Yeah,
and
I kind of wanted.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I kind of wanted to go further in that. So I think it was during Ramadan, I went to a mosque near Simon's place. I think it was just after I finished high school. So, all my life, through an Islamic school that I went to for a few years, through background, through community, through everything, everyone just kind of grows, even if it's not specifically said to you, or sometimes it is specifically said to you. It's just like the whole notion of homosexuality is haram. Like it's just a clear line, there's nothing breaking it. And then it was only at this mosque that I went to, and the imam was giving like a little talk between like the 4 rakats after Tarawih, and he was telling us about how like Allah's given everyone a test, and for some people it comes in all different shapes and forms, and that's between you and your God. And so for people to quickly judge and say, oh, it's haram for you to be gay, like, you can't control the feelings that you have given. That's come from Allah, you know. So you can't say what's right and wrong for how someone feels. That's not controlled by you. Sometimes it's not even controlled by them. It's a biological thing, you know. And so for someone to persecute you for that is like, that's not your place to do it. And that's how I've always seen it. And it's something that
And I wanted to, if we're talking about kind of there's within kind of the Islamic, within Sharia, the burden of proof is quite high for even such a punishment. And I don't want to get into the technicalities, but the burden of proof to like, especially like I know that, you know, in Muslim countries, for example, right? If they're following the Sharia or the Islamic law, according to what they're supposed to, then these individuals are supposed to go through some, you know, trial. There's lots of witnesses. You can't just hold hands and say they're gay. Like, I mean, it's, you know,
it's an interesting point you brought up, because I don't know if you heard, but in Egypt, they're actually using dating apps, especially like LGBT dating
it's a
apps.
honeypot.
To persecute LGBT people using, you know,
it's entrapment. That's essentially
it's entrapment.
Exactly. So it's like what you're saying is like they completely skipped like all these steps and just went to, oh, you have an account, we're going to arrest you.
Wow.
I'm just my thought process is, why is everyone so interested in other people's sexual activity?
Well, yeah, that's an excellent question.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
there's some people who will not stop talking about it, and I feel like maybe avoiding the topic, it's certainly one way to deal with it, but the question keeps coming up, and the question's now extended to, well, it's not just gays, it's the LGBT community, and that includes trans people as well.
I just want to pause you a bit, and on the chat, Sabik said that, in quotation marks, you can be Muslim and gay as long as you don't act on it, was what someone I had a conversation about this topic had said. So I think that's a viewpoint of a lot of people kind of in this generation, but like the older generation, they don't even like to talk about it, so we don't even know what their views are.
But I think that's problematic as well, saying you can be Muslim and gay as long as you don't act upon it. So if you do act upon it, that means you're not Muslim.
I mean,
I don't think people understand the severity of saying that someone who identifies as a Muslim and saying that they're not a Muslim, they're calling out someone, that is quite severe. And
I'm pretty sure that's a big sin in itself as well.
And I think, it's just, to me, in terms of my faith, and in terms of as Muslims, why is it somebody leaving the faith that is easier for us to handle than someone's sexuality? When the biggest sin Islamically that cannot be forgiven is the sin of associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So why are we so focused on because at the end of the day, you said the word, it's a struggle, it's a test. And so we are adding to that test, right? Like, Islamically, we're not supposed to be asking for tests, because tests are hard, right? And then we are going out of our way to increase somebody's test by saying, how
we're
you're
also going to excommunicate you from the community. I absolutely agree, and that you absolutely can be.
Do you think that's a way of like fear mongering in a way, like kind of for people struggling or like kind of confused about their sexuality, and, you know, don't really have a platform to talk about it? Like, they can't talk to an imam because they're scared. They can't talk to a lot of like our Muslim leaders because they're inept.
If you bring it up,
there is a lot of gaslighting as well, right? Like, the moment you say that, you say you try to defend anyone from the LGBTQI community who also happens to be a Muslim, there's an immediate gaslighting that occurs in these conversations, because then you're written off as someone who's just another one of the liberals. You're yeah, you're a liberal
liberal Muslims. I think
yeah,
that's
or
a trend.
Yeah.
you're a murtad yourself, right?
Yeah, you're a
left,
murtad
if you
yourself.
believe that, you know,
Yeah.
you believe the wrong
Even
thing,
You're a
and you've left the
snowflake.
faith.
yeah, even for some people, like they consider as like fatwa, and I'm like, that's
Yeah,
pretty
yeah.
bold claim.
Well, because there are some people going around, you know, who, you
Yeah,
know,
like for sure,
quote
there are
unquote
people.
have you know, the qualifications to pass fatwas to, and they have been doing this in the past. Look, it again, this problem with that community, it is, there are other sides to that as well. You know, there's the other side where, you know, we can't accept, you know, we can't say that it's not a sin. You know, just like we don't celebrate drinking alcohol, you know, at the same time we can't celebrate that, right? Like we just like we can't celebrate, um, you know,
just
being
just a perspective I wanted to share here is that I think there's the community also feels like they want to protect the faith from some, you know, from changing, right? You know, if you say, you know, you can be Muslim and can be gay, that other Muslims might then come out and say they're gay, and then, you know, and it's not just with
Yeah,
with
they're scared of the religion falling into like kind of a rabbit hole.
yeah.
So are we playing God and we are protecting the religion when God has protected this religion
Itself.
for 1500
Yeah,
years?
I mean,
Absolutely.
the
Well,
way
there is a lot of gatekeeping.
yeah,
There's a lot of gatekeeping.
there's a lot
And
of gatekeeping, but not a lot of people taking responsibility for their own actions.
Oh
Like,
yeah,
and also this idea of, you know, somebody's if you follow this, like it's such a false binary. Like you're either a liberal or a conservative,
yeah,
yeah,
right? There's that's not reality.
yeah,
There is like it's just
like
it's such I don't know. It's just it's
yeah,
like
to navigate like in
look,
stupid.
a
Yeah.
society
yeah,
that we're in today, it's like you can't just be one or the other. You have to accept, you
Yeah.
know, using your own logic and reason and within the bounds of Islam. Like there are still there's still leeway. Like it's yeah, there's no absolutes unless it's like stated in the Quran. Like
yeah,
that's the absolute, and people make their own absolutes,
yeah.
and that's the problem.
I think one of the distinctions, again, like in going back to what I said previously, I think as Muslims we have to be a little bit careful. You know, we can't. We have to, of course, be critical of what's happening around us, so we don't get taken, you know, by the storm of, you know, one side of the camp or the other side of the camp. We have to think for ourselves and understand what the what's at stake, what the Quran actually says, not what, you know, a cleric says or a mufti says. Like you can do the research on your own. If you have your questions, you can talk to different people, get different opinions, um, and then come to your conclusion on what you believe is the right thing to do, right? And one of the things is, of course, there's no the normalization that needs to happen is that just the way, you know, we allow people who drink alcohol to enter the mosque, um, you know, what they do is in their, you know, it's in their own time, but you know, they, because they consume alcohol, it doesn't mean that they're not allowed to enter the mosque. Whether their prayers are accepted or not, that's up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Like we know when to we don't know what's happening in the background, right?
You know, you hear about how we like to praise people that were former, you know, drug dealers or
Yeah.
or
They're
involved
covered
in
in
gangs
tats and all
tats
that.
and murderers, and then they've reverted to Islam and we celebrate them.
Yeah, and
But then
they might still look the same, right? Like they
Yeah.
might still look like how they used to look previously, as a
Yeah,
non-Muslim.
aka Kevin Gates.
yeah,
Yeah.
Kevin Gates, yeah,
Yeah.
he
He's a he's a big advocate for like Muslim rights as well. So it's like, do you not look at the work that he's doing for the Muslim community because he's got tats and because
Yeah.
of his like illegitimate past? Like,
yeah.
Like, yeah.
So
And people
another
may still struggle with certain things, right? It doesn't mean that you can stop them from practicing the faith. It's really, you know, it's a matter between them and God, and
you know,
for us to like completely write someone off
and I think this level
because of
of
their struggles.
yeah, I think this level of gatekeeping as well that, you know, Muslims partake in, kind of like it kind of deters people who are interested in Islam, whether they're trying to revert or just even learn about
Yeah.
the religion. Like they see so much infighting and like conflicts within the community. Like, how are they supposed to know what's right and wrong? How are they supposed to know what Islam's about if the Muslims themselves don't even know what it's about?
Yeah. Isaba, you rightfully pointed out earlier that why do we want to push them away? And when they if they identify as Muslim and they're struggling with some things, why do we want to push them away and make their struggle even more difficult, which would lead them to either leaving the faith, and generally these they're people with these struggles. There's other groups, whether that's and again, I'm not going to name them, but there are groups that will take advantage of them and say, well, have you considered leaving the faith, or have you considered joining our faith, or have you considered becoming atheist? And why do we want to give them that opportunity? If someone identifies as Muslim, and they're struggling with some challenges, let them sort that out, and let that be between them and Allah, and rather than the alternative is a real chance of pushing them away from the faith. So I kind of wanted to segue this into I think what I see as a growing appeal of atheism within the Muslim community, especially those that are living in the West, right, where we're living in a multicultural society, multi-ethnic, multi-faith, or no faith, and the appeal of science, or for want of a better word, scientism, that gives them a worldview that seems or appears rational. As a school teacher yourself, have you confronted these questions, or have you been confronted by these situations?
Yes. I think yes, but at the same time, I don't think it's at the level of hysteria that we're hearing about, that all of our kids are turning into atheists, right? There does seem to be a little bit of a hysteria there. Okay. That's my own perception, and something that I've discussed with colleagues as well, that we see a lot of things online. And it does trickle down it filters into our school system, right? But it's not necessarily something. It's at a time in a kid's life when they're starting to question a lot of these things, because you really start thinking about identity and about your faith system, and about who you are towards your later years, or you start feeling, I guess, confident enough to discuss these things towards the later years of high school, not necessarily in the earlier years. And it's a time also, at that time, there's a lot of what am I going to be for the rest of my life going on, because it's year 11 and 12, right? When we're talking about the later years of high school. And so these questions do come. And the one thing that I would say in terms of as a teacher is that we need to be able to make these kids feel safe enough to have these conversations. We need to be informed enough to be able to guide these conversations in a safe manner. And if we feel like that we cannot, there is no shame as a teacher or as an adult to say, I'm not qualified, I don't know enough, but I can guide you to this person, or give me a little bit of time so I can find out a little bit more, and then we can have this discussion. But to shut down someone, it's basically saying go away.
Yeah.
And what that says to me, if somebody says that to me, is like, yeah, I've proven, that what they said was right. There is no answer in terms of religion here. And
this person's
the questions that I have aren't being answered.
Yeah.
So why would I commit myself to a faith
But why would you want to belong in a community that you feel like doesn't accept you in the first place? That's how some people might feel.
And won't even answer your questions.
Yeah, that too.
And won't even answer your questions.
So
we do a lot of that.
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of ask you two questions here. One is, you mentioned that it's not at the hysterical kind of level, the growth of atheism specifically. It's not as at the hysterical level as it's made to seem. And while I agree with you on that point, that because most people will start to question their worldview, maybe around the time they're in university, or I think, again, don't quote me on this, and please fact check me, but I think the peak cognitive ability for both men and women is around the 25 to 27 year old age. So it's not really, generally I find that those questions don't start to creep in until they're in their kind of early to even late 20s. Some obviously happen after that, but I kind of going through university here, and I kind of I see a lot of and maybe you won't notice that they've left the faith, but I know that they've left the faith, and it didn't so much bother me initially, but when I look at that other sins, and we talked about this just earlier, that other sins are forgivable in the eyes of Allah, right? But leaving the faith, which means either associating partners with God, or claiming He doesn't exist, is to me is I feel like they're without salvation, right? And so while it's not at hysterical levels, I feel like the fact that some of these people would leave because we're not addressing their questions, or we don't have adequate answers to their often very, very legitimate questions, right? Like some of these questions are very, very legitimate, if not all of them. Like, if the problem of evil, right? Why does evil exist if God is good, right? These are, and I don't want to get into all of like the challenging questions that you might confront, but these, if we don't have sufficient answers for our youth, they're going to find answers elsewhere. If we're not giving them the answers that satisfy them, they're going to either look for answers from the wrong people. So I feel like we're not doing enough to lift our game in this regard.
And I think there's also another issue of sorry. So you can go.
No, that's all right. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say there's also an issue of don't question us. When a learned person mentions something, and if the person asks for a clarification, and if the clarification is not sufficient enough, the person is told not to question anymore, not to bicker anymore. And I think
of many imams and like Maulanas and stuff. You ask them something, or like even you ask something as simple as,
just make you feel stupid.
Can you fact check it? It's like a quotation or like reference number, something.
It's like, how dare you question?
Yeah, it's kind of insulting to them. Like, why wouldn't you trust my word? And it's like so much misinformation out there. Like
that happens a lot with hadiths, right? Like
exactly.
An uncle will cite
some game at you, and he won't be able to back it up.
And then, where'd you get that from? And I don't know.
They get offended by it. I'm like, if you're bold enough to make the claims that you do, you should have some sort of backing towards
receipts, mate. Show me receipts.
Yeah. Sorry, Isaba, go ahead.
No, sort of lost my train of thought for a second there, but I think, I think when it comes to teachers, again, it's for everyone. We can't control belief. We can't control faith. The what we can do is, as adults and as teachers, is to provide that safe space and to inform ourselves. And I think that's really, really important, that we need to keep on informing ourselves. And it's about having that safe space to be able to ask questions. And we need to understand that a lot of the kids that come forward with the questions that they have, they don't always necessarily share the same experiences. They have different lived experiences, which shapes their worldview as well, and which shapes their perception of evil as well, right? Because of things that might have happened to them. And I think that it is that's what it is, that we need to remind them that it is okay to have that conversation and not to shut them down. Then when it comes to university, a lot of these conversations happen that the questions that are being asked. So what is Islam's view on LGBTQ people? What is Islam's view on what does Islam say
Apostasy,
on this idea
right?
of the existence of all of these things? Who are asking these questions to you? And why are they asking you these questions? Is it somebody from the outside,
Yeah.
who is asking you these questions with a certain,
Waswasa.
to try and push you forward towards a dominant worldview?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, there's a power issue here as well. There's power in a lot of different sense, right?
Sometimes
but again,
it's
so there's a
even
power
just
issue here as well. Who is asking you these questions? Why
so,
are they asking you these questions? There's a difference between me and having these questions and developing these questions myself. Yep. And having someone else ask me to put me to get
questions
to a
have
certain
intent,
thing.
right? And
Yeah.
so when you ask it, it might say, oh, but why does Islam, have this apostasy, law or whatever? And
seems a little
the question, and they ask it in a way that might seem quite casual, but there's intent behind that.
Yeah.
And the intent often
and it's
is
okay to question that.
Yeah. If you arrive at that
I think
question
we
yourself.
put ourselves, yeah. No, but that's the thing. Like when that question is asked, a lot of the time what we do is we feel this need to answer it, as opposed to questioning, well, why are you asking me this question?
Yeah.
Right? What is the purpose behind the question that you're asking right here?
Yeah.
Now, I can go and explore this myself, because this is something that I am interested in. Yeah, and I can come to my own conclusion. So as teachers, what we do is we try and, in terms of a faith-based school, we remind them, okay, these are the constraints of your religion. Yeah, and you navigate through life within these constraints, and you develop ideas based on that. And some choose to do it and some don't. And we need to also remind ourselves that we can't, faith is such a personal experience between ourselves and God. Yeah. And
it's a journey
not
as well.
everyone will, it's a journey, and not everyone will get there. Not everyone will have that. And it is not something that we always need to feel guilty about, that we need to control. Yeah, we need to, again, we don't give kids this, we don't trust kids. We don't trust women, we don't trust kids, that they have the ability to research things and come to their own ideas. We need to give them that, and the way that we support that is by allowing those conversations to take place, as opposed to shutting it down.
I mean, like my personal experience, like around, it would be around maybe year 10, year 11, is like, because that's around the time when, through like English class, you're taught critical thinking and to question things, not just to take things, as they come, doing like language analysis essays and seeing how people conduct. Like it sort of, I guess, in a way unlocks your mind and a different way of thinking. That was for me anyways. So, I was going through that whole thing, and for the whole time it felt kind of wrong. Like I shouldn't be questioning these things, but you're curious at that age. Of course, you're going to question everything, right? And I think it was just, I never felt like I had that safe space to talk about it, because I felt like I'd be judged, or like someone straight away saying, "Oh, you're not Muslim, because why would you question this and that?" And I think it was just like, maybe Simon knew, maybe he didn't. Sometimes like he'd talk about it, and I'll just listen and be like, okay, that makes sense as to why this happened. So I would kind of understand, like, oh, okay, so that's a question answered. And I think part of what made me come to terms with a lot of things, well, it's two things. One thing is realizing that sometimes we're not meant to have the answers to everything, and we have to be okay with that. And
Absolutely.
The other part is just, I guess, every, it's in Islam, it's Allah who guides you. So, if he wants to guide me to a certain path, he will, and I can't control that. That's just
And we-
something that, I've come to accept. So it's just those two things kind of gave me peace.
And we also need to, I think when we approach religion, we always approach it with one perspective, and this is what we're going to show the kids.
Yeah.
And we forget I think it's important to inform kids that it's not just one perspective within religion, and within the religion there is academia involved, and I think that's another important thing that you mentioned, this idea in year 10, 11, 12, we really focus on critical thinking. So we are teaching them a skill, and then we're shutting that skill down. We're saying, no, don't ask questions.
Yeah. It's like you can do that, but the religion, you can't be critical of, because we're not, a lot of the times, of course there are kids and people who do it, for sport. They're not really trying to find the truth, be it whatever it may be, because everyone's
trying to prove some point they haven't made it.
And
they're agenda driven.
Yeah, they're agenda driven. Exactly. I think even finding truth itself is agenda driven, right? Like that is your agenda.
Or you already know the conclusion.
You're driving that conversation into it.
It's a post hoc.
Post hoc analysis.
Post hoc analysis. That's the term Adam taught me. So I use that.
I invented it, mate. I invented it wisely.
One of the things that, since we're talking about, this, of course, in the West, even in Muslim countries, I was actually watching a snippet of, I think it was Richard Dawkins, who was talking about Muslims leaving Islam and becoming atheist in the Middle East and Asian countries, and it is a problem because, of course, in those parts of the world, there's a very strict form of the religion itself. There's a very strict narrative. You can't have difference of opinion. People, rally under, a very particular set of ideology within that religion, and they will stick to it. And those who question it, because they can't get their answers and they get frustrated and they can't find anyone who can, guide them in the right direction. And they can, of course, find the answers if they really wanted to, but for whatever reason, it doesn't.
Just don't have the avenues, I guess. The right avenues.
Anyway. And there is a growing number. And one of the things that I came across recently was, when you're looking at, ahadith, and you're looking at, the different narrations out there, there's even different tajweeds, and you're looking at, the translations and the transliterations of the Quran. What you read, right? It's been translated by someone based on their understanding of the text and the language itself, the Quranic Arabic. A lot of the times those things don't get updated, and when I say updated, I'm talking about the words that are used to describe what's written, and a lot of the times people use that to prove or invalidate Islam itself, to kind of weaponize it and use it against itself, especially when it comes to
cherry pick verses.
Yeah,
but then when you bring that stuff up to those people, or like what you're saying, when you bring that up to people, they're like, oh, it's convenient that, it's up to interpretation. So it's like,
no, I'm talking about not just like an interpretation of an aspect. I'm talking about, and this is, by the way, just to give you guys a bigger picture. It's more about against the scientific truth in Islam, right? Like they will use how the universe was created, and the way that it's written in the Quran may not, when you translate it, it may not make sense. And for someone who comes from a STEM background, might read it and say, hey, hang on, like, there's clear like evidence out there that this is not how it happened. And here you are, like you're reading a book that says otherwise, can you prove it? And then kids, that what it does is it's just a seed of doubt, it's placed there. And when they go and speak to someone at the masjid, instead of the sheikh or whoever saying, I don't know, they will try to explain it without them having STEM understanding, right?
Yeah, and likely that individual will Google search it, and the first 10 results will be all from that very Islamophobic, right?
Yeah, I mean, people like Richard Dawkins, out there to make that happen, right? Like that's, one of his agendas, if not his main agenda. Like, going after the religious, not just the Muslims, but after the Jews, the Christians, the Buddhists. So it's not just one community they go after. They find Muslims to be a more fun target because of how strong we are with protecting what the text says, right? Like we really take we'll take it to the streets if we have to,
Yeah, because we rile up easy.
Very easily. We're easily triggered. So
we're low hanging fruit, and we're very easy to make angry. So it's
yeah,
a combination.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think I was thinking about the other day is there needs to be certain things are required to be revised, and so we can understand what the Quran says better.
I think you might need to qualify the revised part just to make it clear to the audience.
Okay, so the Quran will never change, right? And we can't manipulate it. By the way, that's not what I mean to say. What I mean to say is we may want to look at the current understanding and see what we can understand better from the Quran itself. And also use that, because that's what if you go back in time, a lot of the old we talk about the old philosophers and the old the golden age of Islam. They looked at the word and they pondered upon it to understand what it really meant, because if they stuck to the original understanding of it, or how it was interpreted in that time previously, they would have they wouldn't have made those breakthroughs. They really looked at it, they're like, hang on, maybe this is what this actually means, right? It's just the way that we're looking at it, because it's such a complex language, and the Arabic that's spoken currently, yes, they share the roots, but they're not the same language. So yeah, I think there needs to be, we need to, I guess, what I think would be a good place to start is allowing people or kids, because I've seen this, kids who study the Quran are not necessarily going and studying science and mathematics to a higher degree, because they limit themselves to one area, which is they'll stick to theology. But I think there needs to be a merger, because you look at like the Muslims from the golden ages, there was a merger of the science. It doesn't mean that one overpowers the other. They're both separated, but what it does is it opens up the avenues, right?
Yeah, I think like the Jewish schools in Australia have done really well in that regard, and I think the Islamic schools are doing pretty well as well. They're kind of
Look, I didn't have that experience. I'm going to be very honest. I went to a Muslim school. I didn't have that experience.
Yeah,
okay?
the faith-based schools. You kind of look at some of the Jewish schools that in Victoria, and they've academically done well, but they're kind of trying to build students that are well-rounded in their faith as well as their secular studies, and I think they've done a pretty good job of that. And I still
think there needs to be more work done.
Absolutely, I completely agree.
I think the Jewish community itself, I think they've probably taken more proactive approaches to this issue, and I think we are well equipped. We do have a lot of good academics.
They're also more open to interpretation and questioning.
I mean, yeah.
I think, like all the things that we've discussed about this topic, the main thing that I see is just being approachable, because a lot of these people that are supposed to be our leaders and our teachers and that, they're not approachable.
Yeah, I mean, you do find that to be, more common than it should be, unfortunately. And it's okay to, ask a question that, quote unquote is offensive, right? Because this person's just trying to find the truth. That's all.
Can I just add, again, I feel like we put a lot of burden onto teachers, and
but that's always been the case. It is on an individual level, right? It is on an individual level.
Responsibility of parents, whose children these are, to give them the tools that they need to, when they're confronted with difficult, challenging questions, to be able to navigate through those questions. That means, well, when I say tools, that not just the tools for critical thinking, but the tools for arriving at satisfactory answers, which is, and it might seem logical, but if you've got a question pertaining to Islam, you don't want to go to Richard Dawkins, right? You want to go to a Islamic scholar. Like it seems like common sense, but it's not done. But I feel like the onus is on parents, not teachers, that are raising their children in their chosen faith, to instill them, because the school will give them the critical thinking, absolutely it will, but to give them the other tools necessary to ground them to the faith. And I feel that part of it is missing. So no matter how much Isaba tries, if it's not being done inside the home,
it will get rejected by the parents, right?
Yeah.
They will even complain to some extent.
And I think that's the thing, like it's everything, whether it's schoolwork or when we're talking about learning, whether it's at home or learning, whether it's religion or secular studies, it's not just teachers. The things need to happen at home for it. It needs to be continuous. And if we don't have that support from parents, it really makes our job difficult. I think also one of the things that we need to be aware of is that again, like neither parents or teachers have all the answers. And when it comes to Islam, we really need to be really sensitive. We don't want to give the wrong information out to these kids. So we need to make sure that information is accessible, that imams or scholars, they are accessible to us and to our kids. And the way that they bring that information forward is something that's accessible as well. So in terms of like, if I give a translation of the Quran to a child, what will they understand?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What will they understand? Because it's not linear, right?
It's not.
It's not linear. The translations are quite difficult. It's something that they'll need to process through. There's a lot of context as well behind verses, right? That's not so. All of that put together, it's really difficult to just say, here's the Quran and here, go understand the faith. And so we really need to make sure that the people who are informed, they are there and they are there to answer the questions. They can't just be, I know that they can't be accessible at all times because that's asking too much of anyone, but yeah.
Well, you teachers aren't on 24-hour on calls?
Not 24-hour Zoom calls, but 24-hour emails. Anyway, let's not get into that one. Yeah, it is. I think, we need to really be conscious of that. And I think also in terms of, there's a lot of things girls want to ask that they might not necessarily feel comfortable asking a male, and in terms of our accessibility to female scholars, it's quite limited.
That is very
there's
true.
a lot of things that we might, and we don't necessarily encourage female scholarship either. What's available?
It's interesting because to be honest, like in a lot of our parents immigrated to this country because of a better life, better education, right? And when they say better education, it's not better religious education; it's better secular education, right? And so the goal or objective was always a better secular education, and it's always been and this goes the same is the same in Bangladesh, but the smarter the child, the more bright, academically achieving the child is, they're pushed into the sciences, right? Or the
STEM,
laws, or STEM, but also law, which might be an exception more recently. But if you're low performing or academically failing, we're going to throw you in a madrasa, so you can become like if the child is failing academically or not performing well academically, you want to send them to the house of God to study the word of Allah and become a scholar. And like rubbish in, rubbish out. You're going to throw the most, the rubbish students into becoming Islamic scholars, and then you expect, you look at the state of the Muslim world and you say, well, it makes sense now, right? Rubbish in, rubbish out.
I
As a teacher, I have to say there is no rubbish students.
As a parent, I will say there absolutely is.
God damn.
Even little things like even the institutions that are, of course, teaching Islam, they also have to, make sure that the kids who are leaving that madrasa, right? Even if, let's say, because that whole training of being a da'i or being the next preacher, involves, and our challenges are, ever evolving. So I think that's where a lot of the kids struggle as well. From certain conservative groups, the kids they're told not to work during the time they're studying Quran, which I think puts these kids at a serious disadvantage. That's what I personally feel, because they don't build the social skills. They don't know how to behave in a corporate environment, or simple thing, make money. Or how to manage their money, how to be smart about it. Because I think those life skills also should be hand in hand, right? And if you look at how Islam was, it's preached in a whole. It teaches you everything beyond just the spirituality. It teaches you how to behave with others, how to treat others, how to manage your money, how to spend it, and the rest of it. So I think there has to be an application side of it, while they're studying the religion, so they can feel like, that this is a very practical thing. And I think that also encourages, kids who do want to become, the next scholar to know that, they can also have a normal life. And, they don't have to sit in one corner. They're not allowed to make money. And I do just want to, kind of going off a tangent, but I remember one of the muftis.
Yeah, they don't have to be a socialist.
Yeah, they don't have to they don't have to live off,
It's an inside joke.
And I remember there's a big masjid down in the southeast of Melbourne, and the mufti, was allegedly making a good amount in the salary, and people kept asking, why is he getting paid this much? And then, I remember asking the uncles, why not? Well, how much do you expect him to get paid? Or do you expect him to live off his salary?
It's like, do we pay our teachers enough? Right?
Yeah. And then they're like, oh, I'm just asking a question.
Isaba says no. Isaba says no. Look, we've had a really robust conversation bordering 2.5 hours. There's lots of questions, and I wanted to give Isaba, I guess, your last or closing thoughts for all of the stuff that we talked about today. It's again some more burden on the shoulders of teachers. So we'll close with that. And I was trying to also sneak out of the podcast before Adam came back, but it's too late now. Damn it, Adam! Another 3 minutes, and we would have surprised you. But Isaba, closing thoughts.
Closing thoughts: provide safe spaces for everyone.
Safe spaces for conversation and dialogue.
Yeah.
In the home, in the schools, in the workplace.
Starts with home. It all starts with home. That's where the.
And I think it goes. I think that's with every single thing that we've talked about today.
Yeah.
It all goes back to that, giving people the opportunity to be able to feel safe. And to be able to have conversations, whether you agree with their ideas or not, which you guys do.
This is a safe space, by the way.
This is a very safe space. If you enjoyed our show, and I have to close with this, guys, so I'm just going to sound like a broken record, but if you enjoyed our show, like and subscribe, tell your friends. Bell notification.
Bang bong, guys.
We're not seeing the numbers climb, guys. We need to get to 100.
Yes, we have to dox my cat. My cat can't stop getting away with
this. This is why we started the show, to dox his cat.
Cat reveal.
Okay.
Cat reveal at 100 subs. I'm just saying.
If you guys like cats, if you like
Or don't like cats.
Yeah, if you don't like cats,
I don't want to limit our podcast to one demographic.
Yeah.
Cat lovers, all right?
Cat,
So-
anti-cat, whatever you
Whatever.
fall on in that particular spectrum.
Or dogs.
Also,
if you like dogs, whatever. Subscribe.
eh,
I
Doesn't
mean, none
matter.
of us have a dog here. So.
but,
Can't dox anyone's dog here.
yeah. But as a side note, we will have the Mind Under Matters show on Friday, so come
Every
check us out
Friday,
then
yeah.
as well. But yeah,
Don't
always
know what
like,
I'm talking
subscribe,
about.
share, and thank you once again, Isaba, for coming in and sharing in your perspectives.
Yeah, we do appreciate the time that you've taken out of your busy day.
Thanks for putting Simon in his place. He's been talking a lot of smack.
Yeah.
All right. All right. That's the end of the show,
we,
guys.
We need an actual expert here.
Thanks, Isaba. Have a great night, guys. We'll see you next week.
Catch you later, guys.
Bye.
See you.
Oh.